Can you take her instead of me? What kind of sorrow forces a little girl to offer her own sister in place of herself? What kind of pain must a woman like Clara, mocked and abandoned for years, carry to stand frozen before such a plea? And yet, when the rancher reached out his weathered hand and took them
Thomas
both,
stands at the edge
could
of the
this be
noisy
the moment
crowd,
her life
steady and
finally turned
silent.
toward love,
He places a stack of
dignity, and
silver
a home she
coins
never
onto the
thought
wooden
she'd
table.
have? The auction block was nothing more than two splintered planks nailed together, yet to Clara, it felt higher than a gallows. The crowd had gathered men with weather-bitten faces, women with folded arms, children who should have been kept home, but weren't. Dust clung to her hem, blood still stained the edge of her dress from the child she had birthed only days before. Her body ached with a pain she dared not show, for even pain was used against women like her. She was 50 now, and the years had written their own ledger across her face lines, from hunger, from nights of weeping silently, from surviving blows that left no bruise the eye could see. Once she had been someone's daughter, someone's bride, someone's mother. But here on this stage of shame, she was just merchandise. The bidding began low. $2 a man barked more for the jest of it than the need. Laughter rippled. The auctioneer smirked as if even this insult was more than she deserved. Clara stood still, hands clasped before her head neither bowed nor lifted too high. Dignity, she had learned, did not always roar. Sometimes it was only the refusal to collapse. And then through the smoke and jeers, she saw him. Thomas, a rancher known for his silence more than his temper, stood at the edge of the crowd. He did not laugh. He did not bargain. He laid two coins down, his voice flat as dry earth. "I'll take her." The crowd hushed for half a breath, then broke into whispers. Clara could not read his eyes. Was this another kind of prison, or a door she had never dared imagine? Sold in shame, aching from birth, Clara was led away, not knowing whether she had been saved or claimed. What did this silent rancher intend for her life? The wagon wheels groaned as they rolled out of town, carrying Clara away from the jeers and spit of strangers. The silence between her and Thomas was heavy, not cruel, just unfamiliar. He guided the reins with steady hands, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Clara sat stiffly, clutching the torn edge of her sack. Inside were only a few things: a threadbare shawl, a wooden spoon carved by her late son, and a faded bonnet she hadn't worn in years. Each item was a relic of a life already buried, carried as if to prove she had once belonged somewhere. When the ranch finally appeared, miles of scrub land stitched with fences, a cabin standing lonely against the wind, it looked less like a home than a test. She stepped down carefully, her legs weak, her body still recovering from birth. Thomas offered no hand, only said in a voice low but not unkind, "You can rest in the house. No one here will touch you." It startled her, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. He had bought her, yet spoke as though she were not property. For Clara, that single assurance felt more generous than any coin. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and wood smoke. On the mantel was a small cross, polished but worn. She traced its edge with her eyes, wondering what kind of grief had carved silence so deep into this man. Later, as dusk fell, Clara heard the faint sound of children's laughter, ghostly at first, until she realized it came from a nearby shed. She walked closer and froze. Two boys, twins, no older than 10, stood peering back at her. Their eyes mirrored both fear and hope. "Papa," one whispered when Thomas appeared behind her. Is she staying?" Thomas said nothing. His silence was not refusal, but a door not yet opened. Clara's heart trembled. What had she stepped into? Clara came as something purchased, but found two boys looking at her like a prayer answered. Could she be more than what the world had called her? Clara lay awake in the small room Thomas had given her, the rafters creaking with every sigh of the prairie wind. The twins slept in the loft above, their soft murmurs drifting down like half-remembered hymns. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, the ache of childbirth still raw, and wondered if God had simply moved her from one form of suffering to another. In town, she had been a spectacle. Here she was a stranger in a house that carried the weight of old grief. Thomas rarely spoke beyond necessity. He fixed fences, chopped wood, cared for the cattle, all with a kind of quiet that was almost holy, yet it left her starving for words. The twins, Daniel and David, watched her with wide eyes but didn't come near. One morning while stirring a pot of thin porridge, Clara heard a whisper outside the door. "She's too big one," twins said. "Papa won't keep her." The other hushed him, but their words had already split her chest open like an old wound. She stirred harder, the spoon clanging against the iron pot. How many years had she lived under that same judgment? Too heavy, too plain, too much woman for a world that valued smallness? That afternoon Thomas came in, muddy from the fields. He paused when he saw her at the table, shoulders tense, eyes down. "They don't mean harm," he said quietly, as if he had overheard the boys too. Clara met his gaze, something hot rising in her throat. "It doesn't matter. I've heard it all before." Thomas's jaw worked, but he said nothing more. Silence, again, always silence. That night, unable to bear the walls pressing in, Clara stepped outside. The moon hung pale over the ridge, and the land spread wide as eternity. She whispered to herself, "I came here for a place to belong. But what if I was never meant to?" Behind her, a door creaked. One of the boys shuffled out barefoot, holding a ragged blanket. He didn't speak, only handed it to her, as if to say, "Stay." Clara clutched it, tears stinging her eyes. The world had mocked her. Even the children echoed its cruelty. Yet here was the smallest sign of welcome. Could Clara endure the weight of doubt long enough to see what waited on the other side? The thaw came late that year, slow and reluctant, as though the earth itself wasn't ready to shed its burdens. For weeks the prairie remained bound in frost, and so did Clara's heart. Yet life does not wait for permission to begin again. One morning the twins tumbled in from the yard, their cheeks bright with cold, clutching a wooden box. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were two tiny sparrows they had found shivering by the barn. "They won't make it without someone to care for them," one whispered. Without thinking, Clara pulled the bundle into her apron, warmed it against her chest, and showed the boys how to crush oats into a thin mash. For the first time, they leaned into her, their small hands resting on her arm, as if trusting her to know the way. Later that night, after the boys had finally slept, Thomas lingered by the hearth where Clara was mending socks. His voice was low, uncertain. "They're changing," he said, glancing at the loft above. "Haven't seen them so steady since their ma passed." Clara's needle stilled. "Children don't need perfection," she whispered. "Only someone who stays." Thomas sat rubbing the calluses on his palms. "And what about you, Clara? Who stays for you?" The question struck her deeper than she expected. No one had ever asked. Her breath caught, but she met his eyes steady for once. "I suppose I do," she said softly. "Even when the world tells me not to." Something shifted in that silence, not loud or sudden, but like a river breaking free from winter ice. It was fragile, but it was real. When Clara returned to her room that night, she found the ragged blanket folded neatly on her bed. A boy's clumsy handwriting marked the corner "Mama." The word was small, stitched in uneven letters, yet it carried a weight that could change everything. Would Clara dare believe that love could be born in such quiet ways? Spring brought longer days, but with the light came shadows Clara had long tried to outrun. The word "Mama" stitched on that blanket had both lifted her heart and frightened her. To be called by a name she had never truly owned, was it a gift or a burden she might not be strong enough to carry? The town, too, had begun to notice. Whispers followed her when she came to the mercantile with Thomas and the boys. Some women shook their heads, muttering that she was too old, too heavy, too plain to be of use to a widower raising children. A few laughed quietly, reminding each other of the cruel tales of her past, a husband who had cast her aside, a family who had treated her like livestock. Clara kept her chin high, but each word slipped under her skin like burrs. One afternoon, as she left the store with a sack of flour in her arms, a man spat near her boots. "Guess a rancher will take just about anything if he's desperate enough." His friends chuckled. Clara froze, her body heavy with shame, until a hand closed gently but firmly around hers. It was Thomas. He looked at the men not with anger, but with the quiet steadiness of someone who had survived grief and would not bend to cruelty. "She's worth more than your whole bitter laughter," he said, his voice deep as an oak's roots. The laughter stopped the silence, heavier than dust. That evening, Clara sat on the porch while the boys played with sticks in the yard. "You shouldn't have spoken for me," she murmured when Thomas joined her. He shook his head. "I didn't speak for you, Clara. I spoke with you. There's a difference." But in the quiet that followed, her old fear returned. Could she truly belong here? Could she hold on to this fragile growing love, or would it slip away like everything else in her life? Clara longed to believe in this unexpected home, yet the echo of cruelty refused to fade. Would she find the courage to stand in the face of her past, or would the weight of shame silence her again? The night after the confrontation, Clara could not sleep. She lay awake beneath the patched quilt, listening to the boy's gentle breathing through the thin walls and the steady sound of Thomas moving about downstairs. Shame still clung to her, but alongside it came a quiet ember of resolve. She had spent her life swallowing words, letting others decide her worth. Perhaps it was time to speak, if not to the world, at least to herself. At dawn, Clara stepped out into the chill air. Mist rose from the pasture, curling like spirits set free. She walked to the barn where Thomas was mending a fence rail. He looked up, his eyes soft in the gray light. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. Her hands trembled, but she did not hide them. "Thomas," she said, her voice quivering but steady, "you deserve to know the truth. About me." And so she told him. Of the marriage forced upon her when she was barely more than a girl. Of the ridicule she endured for her size, her silence, her very being. Of the auction, yes, the shameful day her own kin had bartered her dignity for coin. She spoke of the nights she prayed for love, and the mornings when only survival answered. When her words faltered, Thomas set down his hammer. He did not interrupt. He simply stood broad-shouldered and patient until her silence emptied itself like rain falling dry. Then, with a tenderness she had never known, he said, "Clara, I don't see what they did to you. I see you, the woman who stayed, the woman who loves without being asked, the woman who is more than enough." Tears blurred her vision, but they did not burn as before. They cleansed. For the first time in decades, Clara felt something loosen in her chest, the grip of shame cracking, the chains of old wounds breaking open. She was not what they had called her. She was not what they had taken from her. She was here, alive and chosen. When the boys came tumbling out to the yard shouting for breakfast, Clara laughed, a sound unguarded and whole. The sun had lifted by then, and it seemed to her that even the land breathed easier. Clara had spoken her truth and found no rejection, only arms ready to hold her steady. But could this fragile freedom truly endure when the weight of the past still lingered just beyond the horizon? Spring came slow to the valley, the earth thawing in patches as if the land itself were remembering how to breathe. For Clara, it felt the same. Day by day, she stitched a new rhythm into life, at the ranch cooking bread that filled the house with warmth, teaching the boys to mend clothes, humming hymns as she swept the porch. What once had been survival was slowly becoming belonging. Thomas noticed, though he did not always speak of it. He watched how the boys clung to her skirts when they quarreled, how Clara bent down to listen, as if their small troubles were great treasures worth guarding. He saw the way her laughter, soft, sometimes shy, spread through the house like a lantern glow. One evening, when the sky was painted in bruised pink and lavender, Thomas set aside his work and joined her on the porch. The boys were chasing fireflies in the yard, their giggles ringing like bells. Clara sat with her hands folded, the old ache in her eyes softened but not gone. Thomas cleared his throat. "Clara," he said, voice thick with a courage that felt as fragile as glass, "I can't promise you riches. I can't promise you a life without struggle, but I can promise you this." He reached for her hand, rough fingers covering her trembling ones. "I don't want you here out of pity or duty. I want you here because this is your home if you'll have it, because you are the heart of it." For a moment, Clara's breath caught, as if she were still that girl who had once been bartered like livestock, told she was too much, too little, too late. But then she looked at Thomas, the steadiness of his eyes, the truth written there without fanfare, and she felt her chest rise with something she had not dared to name: hope. Her answer was quiet, but it carried more weight than any shouted vow. "Yes, Thomas. Yes." That night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, Clara finally allowed herself to rest. Not as a burden, not as a woman cast aside, but as someone who had been seen and chosen for who she truly was. And when the boys leaned against her, calling her mama in their sleep, she realized the truth. Her story was no longer about loss, but about love that had arrived late yet in time. From auction blocks to quiet porches, from shame to belonging, Clara had walked a long road. But now, with Thomas and the boys beside her, The path ahead seemed lit by something she thought she had lost forever, light that whispered the best chapters can come last. In the end, what began with a little girl's trembling words, "Can you take her instead of me?" became something far greater than any of them expected. Clara, once burdened by years of rejection and silent suffering, found herself no longer standing alone in shame, but standing within a circle of belonging. And the rancher, once hardened by loneliness, discovered that love does not always enter loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a hand held steady, a child's whisper, or the courage to stay when others have left. Perhaps that is the lesson for all of us. Love is not about ownership, but about presence. It is about seeing someone fully, scars, sorrow, and strength, and saying you are enough exactly as you are. In the dusty corners of life where hope feels thin, kindness can still take root, even late, even slow, even quietly. And maybe, just maybe, that is what makes it so powerful. Friends, if this story touched your heart, I invite you to carry its quiet truth into your own days. Show up for someone. Hold space for their story. Believe that second chances are still possible. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, please subscribe to None, Wild West Saga. Share this video with someone who may need its message, and leave us a comment below. Tell us, would you like to see what comes next for Clara and the children? Or would you like another story of late blooming love and healing? Because out here and in life, every ending can still be a beginning.